Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, June 21st, 2022. Okay, a little bit of numerology going on here. And, I believe, lots of things happening today. First of all, everybody should know Mom's birthday. So everybody say happy birthday to Mom. And I'll be doing that later on, although maybe this counts as an early start, sometimes listening in, so maybe it'll work. And if not, well, we'll call you later. Anyhow, where were we with all of this? Oh, it looks like a thing that I wanted to tweet earlier has gotten screwed up, and I think the person I was retweeting has done something and redone his thing and yada yada, and now it's gone. So okay, I'll have to do that one over again, but I'll tell you what that was about too. But in addition to it being Mom's birthday, many of the other people of the planet might recognize it as summer solstice. So hopefully that makes some sense for people. And longest day of the year, and it feels like it already. It's really becoming difficult as we speak. But okay, one of the things I was trying to do and get done just before the show, as I was gathering up news from the Twitter machine, was retweeting the tweet from Ryan. Well, how does he say it? Struck. S-T-R-U-Y-K. I don't watch enough CNN to have been able to see him do stand-up reports or be introduced, so I don't know how his name is pronounced. It's maybe Strike, Ryan Strike, S-T-R-U-Y-K, I guess. Probably big famous reporter and everything, and I don't know. But blue check and all that. Passing on the news that the Texas Republican Party platform, well, their convention, of course, was a festival of lunacy, as it almost always is. This time marked, as we mentioned yesterday, by taunting and jeering at and apparently even physically assaulting Republican Congressman Dan Crenshaw, jeering at him as Eye Patch McCain, which is apparently something derived from a Tucker Carlson insult of the guy. I think because, at some point he might have said, maybe there shouldn't have been all that violence, or maybe we shouldn't have allowed Donald Trump to do all of the stupid and illegal and unconstitutional and physically dangerous things that he did. I understand John Cornyn got an earful too, because he has to this point been saying, well, I'm open to a very, weak, but at least it exists and might be moving forward, structure for gun safety legislation, and they are gun absolutists there among the activists of the Republican Party in Texas. So the whole thing was a real, crap show, as the kids like to say, and lots going on. Plus, of course, the adoption of platform planks that include secession from the United States, that it's the official platform of the Republican Party of Texas that Biden was not properly elected and isn't president of the United States, all these sorts of things. And among them, Ryan's tweet here that the new Republican Party of Texas resolution reads, "We reject the certified results of the 2020 presidential election, and we hold that acting, how do you like that? They threw in a little acting. They didn't use our sound effect for it, I doubt it, but an acting president, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., they went with the whole thing, like they were calling him down for punishment, a parent. Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., you get down here. And that he was not legitimately elected by the people of the United States, which is interesting because, I don't know. They don't even recognize then, I guess, his popular vote victory. I don't know whether they would go so far as to say that. I assume that if they think they are going to, if they're jumping in with both feet and claiming that the votes weren't really there and there was ballot box stuffing, I guess just go all the way. There's an accompanying CNN article that I'm sure is Ryan's responsibility. But that caught my eye because it had a picture attached to it and everything. And of course, It's quite an extraordinary statement. And, it's weird that the Texas Republican Party has a flat earth plank in its platform, but they have frequently done such things. The story that it links to, by the way, from CNN, not from Ryan Strike, or however he pronounces his name. That's make it a good, cool, active name, like Howitzer Explosion guy from way back when. But this is Chandeliers Duster, and I'm not certain if I'm pronouncing her first name correctly, but she's got the byline on the piece. Texas GOP adopts resolution rejecting 2020 election results. Looks like a good lengthy article. Mentions, or there's a link here to the situation with Dan Crenshaw as well. I don't know if there's any, I don't want to give her short shrift or anything, or the story for that matter, but Texas Republicans are crazy, and that's the most own the libs thing they could think of to put in a platform. So they did it, and I am sure the piece is chock full of quotes from people who are sure they're right and they're crazy, and we're supposed to point and laugh at them, but the article won't do that because both sides something. I guess it would be interesting to see whether somehow this author departs from that format and says, no, this is just flat nuts. It is, like I said, it's a flat earth plank in the platform, and it's probably one of many. Of course, we also discussed the one yesterday that declared, everything but Ozzie and Harriet lifestyle to be deviant and unnatural, right? So, we're almost used to that. I guess the more extraordinary of the two. Unfortunately, I don't think it's necessarily, I don't know if you can say the one's worse than the other, but you can certainly say, I don't know, maybe we've become numb to it. We shouldn't, and it's unacceptable either way, but I guess if you had said, hey, do you know Texas Republicans are adopting a platform plank that they're anti-LGBTQ plus whatever other letters there might be these days? Yeah, sure. I disagree with that vehemently. It's why I'm not a Republican. It's why I don't live in Texas. But, yeah. But then if you said, I guess the more extraordinary is, do you know that the Texas Republican Party, as a matter of their platform, don't accept the legitimacy of the election of the current president of the United States? That's new. I don't think it would surprise me. And certainly now everybody just says, well, of course they're doing that. But I don't know. A couple of years ago, you would say, as between the two, you'd say both are crazy. One is nasty, but expected from Texas Republicans. The other is, I didn't think they were going to go quite that far, but apparently they did. So, that doesn't mean it's any better or worse for that matter, or that you should lay off of one or just come to expect the one or versus the other. Okay, but there's a lot there to unpack. I wish they would pack it back up again and ship it out of here. All right, so let's see. I don't think I'm scanning through the article. It's not that long, but I think it hits all the same points that we have hit in our own recollection. There's John Cornyn getting booed at the event, and Crenshaw having his own problems. And I still haven't seen exactly the video, but I guess the fact that it isn't still splashed all over the internet means it wasn't a violent assault on him, but only, I guess, what you would call technical assault on Crenshaw. We don't like either one, of course. It's nasty and not right. Okay, well, let's see. Time to move on to other things. Let's see. For instance, there is the morning tweet from Bill in Portland. So we have that under our belts and can add that. Kagro in the Morning Radio Show is live now. This much you have figured out by this point, I'm sure. Kagro X welcomes you to summer. We did do that by reminding you that there are only 183 shopping days left until winter. And then the winter solstice and the festivals that accompany, of course. Hurry, the thermal underwear is going fast, and you tell it to slow down. It's not easy to catch thermal underwear, and it's practically true. Retail at this point has pretty much flipped the seasons 6 months or whatever. I'm surprised there's no Christmas candy on the shelves at the supermarket already. But they're selling off the last of the fireworks and horrible looking red, white, and blue sponge cakes. I don't know. Whatever they've made at the bakery. Sometimes the bakery comes up with some real crap. But I guess they eventually get rid of it. It's time for red, white, and blue stuff and July 4th, and it's even late in the season for that. But at the retailers, at the clothing retailers, once again, you can't sell. Apparently, that's the rule. You don't sell clothes for the season that you're in. You're selling clothes for the season that's coming later. And I understand the need to prepare for things, true. But, I mean, it's 90 degrees out, and I don't know. Maybe a pair of shorts. Put it out there. Someone might buy it. I find that interesting. Although maybe it's because for me, I mean, I don't spend a great deal of time shopping for clothing, typical, I guess we would say typical male in that sense, in terms of not a fashionista. That's pretty typical, actually, of plenty of men too, but not me. And, I'm an old married dude, and they don't tend to spend their time on that stuff. And plenty do, but not me. As I mentioned, I was in though I spend my time in outlet stores, right? That's where I'll tolerate. And I was in the Columbia outlet store, and the main body of the store was all full up of like fleeces and things. It wasn't blazing hot yesterday, but it was just uncomfortable to be around that much fleece. It's very strange. But they did have some summer items there. And you know how they are with the candy. Forget about that. That comes out like they're already on to the next year. I wouldn't be surprised at some point to be out there in January, February, and have the Valentine's Day candy out on the thing. And there's a big banner on it that says, this is actually for Valentine's Day next year. We're getting that far ahead of things. It seems bizarre, but what can I tell you? There's a whole Republican Party, state Republican Party that doesn't recognize the President of the United States. So, and he's not hard to recognize. He's a very recognizable guy. I don't understand the problem. All right, let's see. Other items for consideration today. I should remind you that it is Tuesday. I think I may even have said that at the beginning of the show. And in the Morning Post, I reminded everybody it is one of the SCOTUS decision days where they're expected, or everyone's on alert for receiving opinions in still pending cases. There are still some biggies out there, the biggest ones There's, of course, the abortion decision that was allegedly what was leaked earlier, that they now will show us at some point whether or not we got the draft pretty much right, or whether it's changed since then. We'll see. But they still have a couple of days to do it, so they could just make everyone wait on the edge of their seat today and not issue it, but then issue it at some later date, which will probably cost us a visit today from Joan McCarter, regardless of whether, if it comes in, she'll be busy writing about it. If it doesn't come in, she'll be busy waiting for it to come in. And the Supreme Court seems bound and determined to ruin your day one way or the other, whether they issue the decision or whether they don't. So we're waiting on that. Another morning tweet that was of some got some special attention. Happened to notice this one here. Let's open it up from Driftglass, Mr. Electro on Twitter. And you almost certainly are all following along with Mr. Electro. But if you're not, Mr. MR, of course, _ Electro. Fun fact, says Mr. Electro / Driftglass, as those who know him from blogging days know him. Fun fact, based on the Never Trumper standard for heroism, that is to say, pushing back against Trump and his co-conspirators, however lightly, but based on that standard for heroism, every single Democrat deserves 17 medals of freedom and an effing parade down Fifth Avenue. I'd say that's about right. 17? Sure, why not? We'll accept the calculation there. Save that one for the roundup later on. But that's true. Now we're all running around lauding never Trumpers who pushed back, and there's no prize in it for having pushed back the whole time. That seems odd. All right. Well, let's see. Where are we here? Happen to see Shannon Watts commenting on a gun safety issue at the moment, and a follow-up comment via Twitter from Paul Waldman, no relation. That looked interesting. Shannon commenting, an Oklahoma man in a tactical vest with an AR-15 and a holstered pistol prompted local businesses to lock their doors. And even as people in a Target parking lot called 911 to say the armed man was headed inside, police said he wasn't breaking the law. And guess what? You're right. They're right. He's not. Not that we haven't seen this before, but just another example of what the open carry laws that the gun nuts push for in these gun nutty states allows to happen. It's just what everybody said would happen. You won't be able to tell the difference between a lawful citizen exercising his Second Amendment rights and a mass shooter until the shooting starts. And, it's happened again. Although, again, thankfully this time the shooting didn't start. But there's a Tulsa World article included. Broken Arrow open carry incident raises law enforcement questions. I bet you know what those questions are. What should we do when it goes south? And it already has gone south. I remember it wasn't that long ago in Colorado. They had that situation. Somebody that looked for all the world like they were doing an open carry walk with an AR-15 in, Colorado Springs, I want to say, and then just started shooting out on the streetscape. And everybody was like, well, open carry. No, mass shooter. And then it faded from memory. That's all there was to it. It's already faded from my memory. I can't remember exactly where it was. But I wonder if I could even call it up now if I wanted to. Was it Colorado Springs? Well, who knows? I mean, if you put in Colorado Springs mass shooter, it'll bring up, 10 different mass shootings that happened there. And who knows whether we're going to get to the right one or not. I think it was probably about 2017 or so. There's a list of shootings in Colorado in Wikipedia. I bet that will perhaps point us in the right direction. It's in reverse order. All right. Well, let's see. I'm thinking about the time span. Aurora Town Center shooting? Could be. November 2015 Colorado Springs shooting. There was an October 2015 Colorado Springs shooting. Let's see. Yeah, there it is. Okay, just checking which one it was. The November, see where we are in this country? The November 2015 Colorado Springs shooting was a shooting and 5-hour standoff with police at the Planned Parenthood clinic in Colorado Springs. A University of Colorado Springs police officer and 2 civilians were killed in the shooting. One was a mother of 2, and the other was an Iraqi war vet. The killer, do you want to know his name? Well, we can pass on it for now, was captured alive after police convinced him to surrender. During his arrest, he gave a rambling interview in which at one point he said, "No more baby parts." That's what made him famous. Remember that one? 9 other victims, comprising 5 police officers and 4 civilians, were also shot. So plenty of good guys with guns, and they stopped him with talking. So that's kind of interesting. But the prior month, October of 2015, was another mass shooting in Colorado Springs, or at least the Colorado Springs area. The shooter, whose name again we won't give, randomly killed 3 people before responding police officers killed him. The killer had been open carrying, and some open carry opponents would assert that this allowed such a delay before a response that he was able to kill more people than in a case where police intervention would have been warranted by his presence with a rifle. How do you like that? What an interesting story that is. So, I don't know. If you want to look up the story, I'll give you, just between us, the shooter's name. Not trying to publicize his name, but trying to help you look him up if you want to. Noah Harpham, Harpham. And my guess is if that we then went and Googled his name, we would come up with the proper citations in the news reports of the time, and then you'll be able to hold that up against the Broken Arrow, Oklahoma incident from, I guess, earlier today. Paul Waldman's comment on the situation: this is an aspect of gun culture that has been relentlessly promoted by the NRA and gun manufacturers. The point of this open carry like this is to terrorize people. Are you insecure, resentful, or unsure of your masculinity? Or have these people, that's an ironic thing, have these people terrorized you? Well, don't live in fear of these people. Get your own AR-15 and tactical vest and pistol in a holster. And then you'll feel secure, which you really shouldn't, but there you go. Strap on your gear and watch everyone cower in fear. Then you'll feel like a man. How interesting. That's an interesting point, an interesting sales technique for them. I hadn't really thought about it in that respect, but equally true. All right. Well, not where I intended to linger, but unsurprising for a day like today, as I try and keep an eye out, one eye on Twitter to find out whether anything, happens over at the Supreme Court, which I guess won't happen until at least 10 o'clock. But just keeping an eye out for anything that might happen, and then every picture catches my eye and changes the direction of the show. So ADHD theater this morning, I guess. All right, let's go over to the slower-paced pocket and see if I can find some of the things I thought yesterday I might like to share with you today. Yes. Here's a good one. Rolling Stone has what they call an exclusive, and we'll see how exclusive it stays today. Maybe some of you have heard about this, and if you heard about it from other than Rolling Stone, that will tell us how long stories like this stay exclusive. But how do you like this one? Trump's team setting up Eastman to take blame for January 6th. I like it, and it ought to work pretty good because, quite honestly, he should take a considerable amount of the blame for January 6th, though he's trying mightily to disavow it. And essentially, I saw this story yesterday evening, and the basics of it seem to be that Trump is disavowing Eastman and doing the coffee boy routine on him. Never heard of him, don't know who he is, barely, I wouldn't know him if you put him in a room, something, blah, blah. But interesting, he's got a lot of coffee boys. I don't know if he's a coffee drinker, I don't think so, but maybe not. But I also say for the QAnon's belief that he is some sort of world-class anti-pedo guy, he keeps a lot of coffee boys around, or refers to a lot of his people as coffee boys. A lot of boys kept in the presence of Donald Trump for some strange reason. No, or that's how he dismisses everybody anyway. But yeah, I saw some comments that came from Trump, and I don't know where. That's, again, a great reminder that this stuff is not filtering directly to me anymore now that he's banned from Twitter. He may say it on his Truth Social, and I won't see it directly. People will carry it here and show it to me, but it has less of an impact to me than seeing it directly on Twitter. And reporters go and cover his various appearances, but they just don't come through on Twitter with the same immediacy and urgency. Maybe that has to do with his just not being president anymore, not so much with his Twitter ban per se, but certainly the last year of his, not the last year of his presidency, but the last couple weeks of his presidency, and then the immediate post-presidency were a lot quieter and easier to handle. I'm still a big fan of the Twitter ban for him. So what's going on here? Trump, in recent weeks, has told confidants that he sees no reason to defend the lawyer who tried to help him overturn the 2020 election. Sources tell Rolling Stone. Just classic Donald Trump story. All the work that Eastman did, all the loyalty that he showed to him, even abandoning his own principles that supposedly underlay his theory of how you could overturn the election when none of the things happened. He still says, throw it all out for Donald Trump. And Donald Trump says, I don't even know who you are. So pretty interesting. I am not a subscriber to Rolling Stone, so that's sad. So I would have to read you the pocket version. It is, by the way, a piece by, we got the pop-up ad in the way first. Aswan Subsang. I sure hope I've gotten close to his name correct over the years here. And Adam Ronsley, both on the byline here. Our break, about to come up. But let's get a quick look at what's going on in their exclusive reporting, with the Justice Department and January 6th committee taking a close look at Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the election. He and his cronies could certainly use a fall guy, and it looks like they've found their patsy, right-wing lawyer John Eastman. Who would have guessed it? Eastman worked for Trump as the attorney, devised legal strategies to overturn the election to keep the outgoing president in power. But in recent weeks, Trump has confided to those close to him that he sees no reason to publicly defend Eastman. Two people familiar with the matter tell Rolling Stone. The ex-president is also deeply annoyed with Eastman and all the negative, quote, attention and media coverage that the lawyer's work has brought Trump and his inner sanctum, including during the ongoing January 6th hearings on Capitol Hill. Well, gee whiz, sorry to bother you. Furthermore, to those who've spoken to Trump about Eastman in recent months, the ex-president has repeated an excuse he often uses when backed into a corner. As investigators confront him with an associate's misdeeds, he has privately insisted that he hardly or barely knows Eastman, despite the fact that he counseled Trump on taking a string of executive actions. And we are late on our music here, so we'll cut out at an odd time, but I'll try and keep an eye on it. That he, despite the fact that Eastman counseled Trump on taking a string of extra legal measures in a bid to stay in power, and wrote the so-called coup memo, which laid out the facsimile of a legal argument for reversing his election defeat. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. Ah, yes. The return from the break when the music is late. I forgot all about it, of course. In the space of 2 minutes, I'm so distracted trying to find other stories to share with you and responding to stories that I was just talking about, etc., etc., and I probably just should have set that aside. Extra long, extra weird break, but yes, there we have it. We left off in the middle of the Rolling Stone article saying that, Eastman, who is now being disavowed, is, of course, the author of the so-called coup memo, which laid out, as they put it here, a facsimile of a legal argument for reversing Trump's election defeat. Behind closed doors, Trump will occasionally ask questions about Eastman's fortunes, like that he forgot to do about Mike Pence. Forgot to do, we say. Including bluntly inquiring, is John going to jail? With what a child would. Is Daddy going to jail? Yes, he is. All right. According to a source, this question comes, is John going to jail? According to a source who has heard the former president say this, but publicly Trump has stayed silent. Over the past several months, Trump has been strongly advised by lawyers and several associates not to openly discuss Eastman or his work and to personally avoid the man altogether, according to 3 sources familiar with the matter. At this time, Trump, his legal advisors, and various political counselors would prefer to cut ties with Eastman and keep their distance. in a perhaps vain attempt to build a firewall between the lawyer who enthusiastically pitched strategies for delegitimizing the 2020 election outcome. Remember, it was with enthusiasms that he pitched this. A strategy for delegitimizing the 2020 election outcome, and the ex-president who repeatedly sought his help, the firewall being built between them. They love walls, the Trump Republicans do, and guess what? They don't work any better than the fake one with Mexico. So, shouldn't be a surprise. It has been repeatedly communicated to the former president that he should not even bring up Johnny Eastman's name. I didn't realize that people referred to him as Johnny Eastman. His close friends. My friends call me Johnny, and everybody else just calls me Benedict. But okay. Well, don't even bring up Johnny Eastman's name, because he is maybe the most radioactive person involved in this when it comes to any so-called criminal exposure. I love that. Well, it's not. You're under arrest. No, that's so-called criminal. Oh, yeah, right. Well, you're under so-called arrest then. So-called. All right, that doesn't do anything to distance you. Well, this is from a source with direct knowledge of the matter. Johnny does not have many friends in the upper crust of Trump world left, and most people loyal to the former president are fine with him being left out on his own to deal with whatever consequences he may or may not face. Because loyalty, something. Remember, that was his top, his most dearly held value was loyalty. Donald Trump. What he means, of course, is your loyalty to me, and I don't have any to you. Everyone knows that by now. But yet, there are still people who find themselves surprised by this. Indeed, the infamously garrulous Trump has publicly kept his mouth shut about Eastman. So maybe it's just that. He's been keeping his mouth shut. That's why I don't hear from him very often. Keeping his mouth shut, though, about Eastman anyway. A lawyer whose work became integral to the scandalous efforts to nullify President Biden's 2020 victory. Trump even considered Eastman as counsel for his post-insurrection impeachment, it says here. Nowadays, in the top ranks of MAGA land, there's a clear attitude towards Eastman. And then parenthetically it says Johnny, as some Trump advisors derisively call him. That's very interesting. That probably belonged a little earlier when you first referred to him as Johnny, but that's an editorial note. He might be going down, so be it, as long as he doesn't take anyone else down with him. But I mean, he wasn't going to make himself president with the memo. So I don't think that's going to work. Anyway, Eastman and a Trump spokesperson did not respond to requests for comment from Rolling Stone. Eastman has become an increasing focus for the January 6th committee for his role in spearheading many of the Trump campaign's efforts to overturn the election. Exhibits posted by the committee last week included excerpts of a deposition by Trump White House attorney Eric Hirschman, in which he described a heated confrontation. I don't think I know Hirschman. Heated confrontation with Eastman the day after the insurrection, where he told Eastman, oh boy, where's my censoring noises? I need to have those close at hand. Can I read those? What does it sound like if I just talk over the horn? Can you tell what I'm saying? Like if I'm just cursing up a storm right now? Yeah, I think so. That won't work. I can't just be dropping F-bombs and throwing the horn on top of them. I gotta mute, I gotta stop talking and do the noise. So, all right, what does Eric Hirschman, who I've never heard of before today, have to say to Eastman on the day after the insurrection, January 7th? He told Eastman to get a great, this is the one Greg told us about, get a great criminal defense lawyer because you're going to need it. You stupid son of a... All right, so anyway, he didn't actually add any of that, but I might as well have fun with it. The horn is fantastic. Like I said, it puts a little bit of fun back in bleeping things, even though I really just don't need to do it. It's just that stupid button on the, uploading the podcast. Like, I don't want to I can't click clean if it says something that isn't clean, even though it's being used all over the place these days and increasingly getting by the TV censors, and there are all sorts of words like that. But it's not explicit either if you're saying, hey, that guy is a real hole, or he has for brains, or whatever you want to say. it's not really explicit. There needs to be a third button in there with like, okay, there's some off-color remarks in there, but it's not an explicit. You make it sound like I'm doing a porn video or something. And all I'm saying is somebody said someone was an a-hole. I mean, come on. Well, anyway, but having the horn makes it a lot more fun. It's more fun than the bleep. The bleep is just kind of, it was funny for a second, but I guess the same thing could be said of the horn. But just don't say it to me because I'm still enjoying it. Oh, yes, right. Insurrection and constitutional crisis. Forgot. That's where we were. Shortly afterward, Eastman emailed fellow Trump lawyer Rudy Giuliani. They are colleagues, I guess. I've decided, that I should be on the pardon list if that's still in the works. That's fantastic. That was probably Eastman's most Rudy-like moment in all that. And by the way, no pardon forthcoming. Although I do understand that over the weekend, some of Trump's rumblings were about, well, if I'm going to run again, and if I am elected president, and of course I will be, I might just pardon all these people after all. That would be pretty interesting. Just, if you don't give any moral judgment to it. What an interesting situation, sir. Anyway, anytime you give legal advice and then feel compelled to ask for a pardon, it probably wasn't good legal advice, says Stephen Groves, formerly a lawyer and then a spokesman in Trump's White House. What an interesting identifier that is. Why is he not a lawyer now? Or is he still a lawyer, but he just switched jobs, and that's an odd one. Anyway, okay, Trump world is weird. In a nod to growing calls by the January 6th committee for a criminal investigation of Trump's actions around the election, Trump released a 12-page statement, which the New York Times reports contains the seeds of a potential defense against criminal allegations that the former president attempted to thwart the transfer of power while knowing he had legitimately lost the election. The document cites a range of wild-eyed theories, including 14 references to the bogus election fraud conspiracy documentary 2,000 Mules, the ones that Bill Barr laughed at in his deposition, which reminds me that I think the first time they showed footage of his deposition at the January 6th committee, I commented on it saying it looked more like a panel discussion film than a deposition, but I think that they just were having a socially distanced deposition, so I don't know. It just looked funny, but now I've seen that footage several more times since, and it's clear that that's what it was. Anyway, Eastman, the former clerk for Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, turned conservative constitutional law professor, because that's what they all do, pretty much. I think I forgot the end of the previous paragraph because we were laughing at the fact that Bill Barr laughed at 2,000 Mules. So the document, what was it? 12-page written response from Trump to the latest hearings included 14 references to 2,000 Mules, but it did not mention Eastman or his work that the former president relied on to make the case that his efforts to overthrow the election were within the law, which is fine because most of the previous hearing was about how the fact is that none of those things that he recommended were in fact within the law. Eastman, the former clerk for Thomas, was first welcomed into Trump's orbit during the penultimate year of Trump's term in office. Trump, enamored of Eastman's skepticism of the birthright citizenship afforded by the Constitution, increasingly came to rely on the attorney's crackpot views of election law as the odds of overturning Biden's 2020 election victory grew longer. On behalf of Trump, Eastman authored briefs for the Supreme Court to intervene in the election in Trump's favor, both ultimately discarded by the justices. When the Supreme Court ultimately shut the door on Trump's attempts to leverage the courts to stop the democratic transfer of power, Eastman took up the mantle of cobbling together a legal rationale for why, in blatant violation of the Constitution, Vice President Mike Pence somehow had the authority to stop the counting of electoral votes on January 6th. But the idea that Eastman is becoming something of a fall guy for Trump and various Republicans' efforts in 2020 and early 21 is now so prevalent in influential conservative circles that it's now being acknowledged by some of the former president's favorite right-wing media stars. So I guess their marching orders are to distance themselves and everybody else from Eastman. How many lawyers did Trump have? He had several, and John Eastman has turned into the fall guy. Mark Levin, a Fox News and radio host, said on air last week, he's a lawyer, he's an advocate for the former president. Whether you agree with his legal judgment, his legal findings or not, it's what lawyers do. According to a New York Times report last year, by the way, it says parenthetically, Levin is indirectly responsible for landing Eastman in then-President Trump's inner orbit, simply due to the fact that Trump had seen the attorney on a 2019 episode of Levin's program. Aha. So actually, that's pretty direct in Trump world. You put him on the air on Fox. The idea is to get the president's attention and funnel the guy into the president's orbit. I mean, that's what Levin's program is about. That's what a lot of Fox News programming is about. And they can't logically or plausibly deny that that's the case. They will if they think it'll get them out of trouble. But at any rate, on Trump's social media forum, if you can call it that, Truth Social, the former president has remained silent about Eastman, even as he's come to the defense of other aides and supporters now under scrutiny for their efforts to wage a coup against Biden. In fact, Trump has, quote, truthed. Remember, that's what they call it over on Truth Social. When you send a message, you truth something. You know, clever. If it wasn't for the fact that he's got a reputation for the opposite of truth, it might even catch on. He truthed about Elon Musk's spat with Twitter, the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial, the PGA Tour. I never did get back around to that subject yesterday, but hasn't posted even a fleeting defense of Eastman. But that could just be, Trump's brain is about that. I'm thinking about celebrity trials and golf, not about the fact that I tried to overthrow the government of the United States. When the FBI arrested Trump's former trade advisor, Peter Navarro, for defying a subpoena from the committee, the former president thundered with outrage that, quote, our great trade genius, Professor Peter Navarro, was just handcuffed, shackled, and put in jail, which I loved. I mean, to me, that was fantastic news. Ginny Thomas, whose efforts to overthrow Biden's victory in Arizona, and probably elsewhere, that'll come up, received similar encouragement from Trump when the Washington Post uncovered her emails urging legislators there to ignore the voters' will and proclaim Trump the state's victor. Thomas, Trump wrote after the Post story, is a great American patriot, the wonderful wife of Justice Clarence Thomas, who fought for voter integrity in the great state of Arizona. On Trump's personal website, where the former president hosted written statements after his ouster from Twitter and before the launch of Truth Social, he's been similarly mum. Eastman's name appears on the site only twice in hosted copies of the Supreme Court election briefs that he authored in 2020. Despite multiple stories about the January 6th committee's interest in Eastman, however, Trump's thumbs have remained unmoved on the subject of his one-time attorney's fate. Thumbs unmoved, that's funny. On Truth Social, where the former game show host has offered a running commentary on the committee's hearings, Trump has not once mentioned Eastman, who, as president, has not once mentioned Eastman. While, maybe, as president, he had once hailed Eastman on Twitter as a brilliant constitutional lawyer. Okay, well, that sentence a little bit jumbled. Anyway, Trump aides have remained similarly quiet on the subject of Eastman. His spokeswoman, Liz Harrington, has not mentioned the campaign lawyer, I guess Trump's, since a tweet on January 6th, I guess the year after, like January 6th, 2022, when she hailed his speech at the original January 6th. When she hailed his speech at the rally on the Mall. What? This is garbled nonsense. But okay, Trump aides have remained similarly quiet. Spokeswoman Liz Harrington hasn't mentioned Eastman since January 6th when she hailed his speech at the rally on the Mall. Then it just says, quote, explain the rigged voting machine system that corrupt politicians kept in place for the Georgia runoffs. Whatever. And that's the last line of the article. So, I mean, it may be that I'm looking at the pocket version, which has the screw-ups in it, and they cleaned it up, and I can't get past the paywall to read the current and correct version. That's possibly it. I'm sorry. I don't pay for the publication. I wish I could pay everybody for everything, but, you know, it's rough out there. Inflation and whatnot. You know the story. All right. Let's see. Other stories in pocket that ought to be shared here. Oh, yes. What are these others that, for whatever reason, I have 2 copies of this one put away. We can get rid of one of them. I'm reluctant to read this one, but I guess it's part of the debate these days. But, yeah, always worries me when you have, oh, how come it disappeared on me? A New York Times piece from Jack Goldsmith, I guess, attempting to explain the various barriers to Merrick Garland moving ahead with prosecution. And very frustrating stuff and annoying stuff, and I guess that's really the reason that it was written. And it's difficult sometimes to tell whether you're getting advocacy for a certain, position from Jack Goldsmith, or a sober view of what the other people are saying. It's difficult to tell what's his position and what's not his. He's a legal institutionalist himself, and a conservative one at that. Though he has occasionally said things that are encouraging to people who want to see conservatives prosecuted for their crimes, but letting people know why a certain constitutional conundrum is important, but that cuts against conservative interests. But at heart, he's the kind of person that I would expect to write a piece saying, Garland really needs to tread lightly here, and I think that might be what he's done here in a piece called "Prosecute Trump?" ? Put yourself in Merrick Garland's shoes. Let's see what Goldsmith has to say here. He is, of course, he served in the George W. Bush administration as Assistant Attorney General in the Office of Legal Counsel and as Special Counsel to the General Counsel of the Department of Defense. So, by way of credentializing him, we're done now. The evidence gathered by the January 6th committee and in some of the federal cases against those involved in the Capitol attack pose for Attorney General Merrick Garland one of the most consequential questions that any Attorney General has ever faced. Should the United States indict former President Donald Trump? And that's the big question. And I'm sure this piece, too, goes back and forth on, we can't let things go unpunished. That will lead to more of the same. We've had that argument over and over. Versus, destabilizing for the country. We just don't do such things. Political this, political that. He might run again. The courts won't want to touch the political question doctrines for all these things. Long-standing tradition that we don't do this sort of thing. I was sort of thinking about that in the abstract yesterday. So this will surprise no one that I feel like, I understand the long-standing tradition of not wanting to prosecute political opponents, etc. But, for me, we depart from tradition when we have an insurrection, right? Basically, I understand the viewpoint. I've disagreed with it many times, but I understand the viewpoint of it's just long-term not in our great interest to be prosecuting people over policy and political differences. And that's all true. And I'm always upset with the amount of leeway and deference we give to the executive branch in these things, in terms of just, there's definitely a second legal system, of criminality. Everyone else lives under this standard, and government-related work, and the president and all the people who serve in the executive branch tend to serve under this standard of justice. And as disappointing as it is, I understand it. But I mean, still, there needs to be some basic minimum requirement of people in government. Like, you're going to get all this deference, and it's built into the system, and we've established all sorts of precedents since the design of the system that have sustained this great deference we give you. There's a million ways that you can break the law in the service of the President of the United States and get away with it because we're afraid to, start down that road. But at a minimum, all the deference that we give you, all the extraordinary legal standing that you get, all the instances in which the president really is above the law, even though we keep saying he's not, in exchange, all we ask of you, the check and balance system, right? We got to have something. It's tremendous power. There needs to be a check against it too. And it might be something that is very rarely or almost never violated. It's okay to set the game up this way. But if it is violated, you really have to do something about it. You get all this deference built into the court system, inherent in the Constitution, et cetera, et cetera. All we ask is you got to come and go from the office peacefully. You can't take power violently. You can't take power contrary to principles of democracy, and you can't leave or refuse to leave in violation of those same principles. Once you do that, I think it's fair to say that's your test. Once you do that, all bets are off. All the deference you get, and we go so far out of our way to make sure that presidents aren't held liable civilly, criminally, anything. So many escape hatches from liability for presidents. The only one thing that we ask for you for not shutting that pipeline down and just subjecting you to regular criminal and civil liability for everything that you do is you got to make your comings and goings peaceful transfers of power. If you disrupt that, I say all bets are off. And all bets are off. You've seen me on Twitter and heard me commenting wryly in asides to Greg. Donald Trump should, be in jeopardy of forfeiting certainly his freedom if you don't believe in forfeiting his life for the crimes that he's accused of. And maybe you might say, well, if he were more overt in these things, I might support holding him directly responsible and putting his life in jeopardy, and trying him for a capital crime for all these things. Whatever your level of comfort is, there certainly needs to be liability, and we always like to say accountability, and we're all worried about that stuff. But again, once you're not agreeing to the basic framework of I will come into office and I will leave office peacefully under civilian order and accept the outcome of elections and simply, go, then, once you do that, then if you will agree to that, we'll afford you all these protections. And it's a test that, 44 presidents have passed. The 45th didn't. So, don't tell me about what we did with the previous 44. I don't care anymore. He's broken the basic covenant with the country, with the people. And I can't be worried about what precedent it sets for future presidents if we're going to make the assumption that future presidents are going to go back to the old tradition of coming and going from office peacefully. So that's where I stand in all this, regardless of what Goldsmith is about to tell us. Now back to Jack's Gold. He's organized his thoughts. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt about that for now. The basic allegations against Mr. Trump are well known. In disregard of advice by many of his closest aides, including Attorney General William Barr, he falsely claimed that the 2020 presidential election was fraudulent and stolen. He pressured Vice President Mike Pence to refuse to count certified electoral votes for Joe Biden during the electoral count in Congress on January 6th, and he riled up a mob, directed it to the Capitol, and refused for a time to take steps to stop the ensuing violence. To indict Mr. Trump for these and other acts, Mr. Garland must make 3 decisions, each more difficult than the previous, and none of which has an obvious answer, unless you ask me. First, he must determine whether the decision to indict Trump is his to make. If Garland decides that a criminal investigation of Trump is warranted, Justice Department regulations require him to appoint a special counsel if the investigation presents a conflict of interest for the department, and if Garland believes such an appointment would be in the public interest. So, maybe, maybe not, but that's the first decision. The department arguably faces a conflict of interest, though. Trump is a political adversary of Garland's boss, President Biden, because he can still run for office for whatever reason. See, had we eliminated him from eligibility with an impeachment, that would be a different issue. Trump is also Biden's likeliest political opponent in the 2024 presidential election. That's the more relevant. Garland's judgments impact the political fate of Biden and his own possible tenure in office. The appearance of a conflict sharpened when Biden reportedly told his inner circle that Trump was a threat to democracy and should be prosecuted, and complained about Garland's dawdling on the matter. Even if conflicted, Garland could still keep full control over Trump's legal fate if he believes that a special counsel would not serve the public interest. Some will argue that the public interest in a fair-minded prosecution would be best served by the appointment of a quasi-independent special counsel, perhaps one who is a member of Mr. Trump's party. But then again, all special counsels are a member of Mr. Trump's party. Because why are we ever using special counsels? And the answer is, well, whenever a Republican gets a modicum of power, he abuses it and has to be investigated by special prosecutors. It's just the way they do business. And the sense of fairness, whatever that might mean, that we have developed about these things is, well, if he was prosecuted by a Republican, then Republicans wouldn't argue against the prosecution and they would come to accept it. And that has never been the case either, so forget it. Don't worry about that anymore. Anyway, but no matter who leads it, a criminal investigation of Trump would occur in a polarized political environment and overheated media environment. In this context, Garland could legitimately conclude that the public interest demands that the Trump matter be guided by the politically accountable person to whom the Senate confirmed in 2021. All right, welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show. Somehow out of breath from 1 minute break, but okay. Well, just clearing things up during the break while the microphone was off. But yeah, once again, an awkward outro from into the break. Where were we with this? Right, Jack Goldsmith was reporting, or opining that no matter who was to lead any investigation into Trump, that is to say, whether a special counsel or the Justice Department itself, or if a special counsel, a Republican special counsel or otherwise, no matter who leads it, a criminal investigation would happen in a polarized environment and a tough, overheated media environment. So, in leaving the investigatory power with himself, Goldsmith was saying Garland could legitimately conclude that public interest demands that the investigation be headed by somebody who the Senate has confirmed. That would be, of course, him, the politically accountable person whom the Senate confirmed in 2021 by a vote of 70-30, Merrick Garland himself. Legit argument, and not a bad one. If Garland opens a Trump investigation and keeps the case, decisions he might already have made, by the way, we just don't know. The second issue is whether he has adequate evidence to indict Mr. Trump. The basic question here is whether, in the words of Justice Department guidelines, Trump's acts constitute a federal offense and the admissible evidence will probably be sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction. That's the Department of Justice guideline. You don't prosecute people from the DOJ, from DOJ, Main Justice, as they call it. But you don't prosecute people unless it's probably likely that you will, in fact, get and sustain a conviction against that person. No frivolous or chance-taking prosecutions from the DOJ. That's what they like to say they stick to. They're not saying only prosecute cases you can win, but they're saying only prosecute cases you can win. They want wins. They don't want losses. They don't want black eyes. They don't want to establish precedent that runs counter to the national interest. They want to be sure of what they're getting out of things. And of course, they want a, quote unquote winning record to the extent that matters. But it's mostly about, don't take on a case that's going to make it harder to prosecute people who are close to this line in the future, if you can help it. Anyway, these will be hard conclusions for Mr. Garland to reach. He would have to believe that the department could probably convince a unanimous jury that Trump committed crimes beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the usual standard. It's tough. But Garland cannot rest this judgment on the January 6th committee's one-sided, as he says, I don't know if it really is one-sided, factual recitations or legal contentions, nor can he put much stock in a ruling by a federal judge who, in a civil, in a civil subpoena dispute, a process that requires significantly lower standards of proof to prevail than in a criminal trial, concluded that Trump, who was not represented in this case, more likely than not committed a crime related to January 6th. And that's a critique probably long overdue for that. I mean, things that a lot of people have hung their hats on for the last couple of weeks since, I forget which judge it was, but it's probably linked here. But you remember that the judge had said in the case of the committee fighting, I believe if my memory serves, the committee fighting with Johnny Eastman about over his claims of executive privilege for certain of his communications with Trump and the White House about the election. And there are a million reasons to overrule that privilege, but among them there was famously the invocation of the crime fraud exception to attorney-client privilege, and that there was, as this judge said, lots of evidence, plenty of evidence to conclude that more likely than not there was a crime involved, and therefore the crime fraud exception would be triggered, but there were plenty of other reasons to deny privilege to Eastman on these communications, and they didn't grant that privilege. But Goldsmith makes a good point. This was not a criminal trial of Trump at the time. That wasn't the context in which the judge was ruling. And Trump was not a party to that litigation and couldn't make his arguments on his own behalf about the relative strength or weakness of the attorney-client privilege, or make his own arguments to dispute the conclusion that there was some reason to invoke the crime fraud exception. He wasn't party to this, and it wasn't taking place in the criminal context. So it's of some, I guess there's some question to the value of this pronouncement from the judge that it was more likely than not that a crime had been committed. Instead, Mr. Garland now must address how any charges against Mr. Trump would fare in an adversarial criminal proceeding administered by an independent judge, where Mr. Trump's lawyers will contest the government's factual and legal contentions, tell his side of events, raise many defenses, and appeal every important adverse legal decision to the Supreme Court. The two most frequently mentioned crimes that Trump may have committed are the corrupt obstruction of an official proceeding, that was the official proceeding being the January 6th vote count, and conspiracy to defraud the United States in working to overturn election results. Many have noted that Trump can plausibly defend these charges by arguing that he lacked criminal intent because he truly believed that massive voter fraud had taken place. Trump would also claim that key elements of his supposedly criminal actions, his interpretations of the law, his pressure on Pence, his delay in responding to the Capitol breach, and more, were exercises of his constitutional prerogatives as chief executive. Garland would need to assess how these legally powerful claims inform the applicability of criminal laws to Trump's actions in what would be the first criminal trial of a president. He would also consider the adverse implications of a Trump prosecution for more virtuous future presidents. So a lot going on there. There's the invocation of, well, if we don't say something now, we'll never be able to do anything, or it opens the door to all sorts of shenanigans in the future. If you don't prosecute something like this, you'll just get more of it. That's sort of addressed here. But it also brings me back, I think, to my own opening theory statement, which was, okay, yeah, it's true that this would be the first criminal trial of a president, and it raises all sorts of questions about the unique constitutional authorities and powers of the president. But like I said, to me, it seems like the good building blocks, good foundation for establishing a test here, that the minimum basic requirement in order for you to avail yourself of all of these privileges and protections is that you agree to come and go quietly in your administration and accept the rule of law as the final word, which I think, by the way, should include the understanding that the Supreme Court will, on matters as fundamental as this, who is the president of the United States, will have to abandon, I think, the political question doctrine at some level and agree to render some sort of ruling. You can't simply say, well, because it involves the presidency, and the presidency is obviously political, and determining who the president is going to be is a political issue, because then you just leave it to the person, anybody with an ostensible claim and power behind it, to say, well, I'm the president, and no one can say otherwise because it's a political question. The courts can't rule on it. There's no role for the Congress in any of this, as far as anyone knows, at least to date. Who knows what we'll discover are in the penumbra later on. But, this opens the door to simply allowing anyone to declare themselves president if they've got, an ostensible claim and the power to back it up, even a crappy claim, but lots of power. You're really going to have to eventually make a decision on things like this. But, yeah, there's also, by the way, the level on which you can dispute this, which is that, no, none of the prerogatives of the constitutional presidency ought to be present here. This is a political candidate fighting as the head of a political campaign to stay in office, yes, but this is ultimately a campaign issue. This is not anything to do with the official capacity of the presidency. The official role of the presidency is, as I stated, to come and go peacefully. And, the many things that happen in between. But as to the comings and goings, presidents, that is to say, those entities entitled to these deferences and protections, come and go peacefully. Ones who don't are outside of that scheme of protection and acting at best as a political candidate, which sometimes comes with its own rights and privileges, but not those of the presidency, right? Where he's saying, Trump would be able to claim the key elements of his supposedly criminal actions, his interpretations of the law, his pressure on Pence, his delay in responding to the Capitol breach, all were exercises of his constitutional prerogatives as chief executive. Like, that wouldn't apply, for instance, were Trump a challenger to the presidency, as he will be in 2024, for instance. I mean, what Goldsmith is saying here, and maybe he would even agree with this. Goldsmith isn't above saying this, that the use of force to stop the electoral count by Biden in 2024, to stop the electoral count that may or may not lead to the election of Donald Trump in his place, is doing that inherently an exercise of executive power, or is it really just a political candidate looking to hold on to power? Well, it's difficult to say, because at January 6th, 2021, Trump is still president. Were he the challenger, that would not be in his, that would not be a power that's in his hands. Unless, of course, it happens in 2024, at which point Donald Trump will claim it's a power that's in his hands and say that, well, I used to have that power officially, and I was just about to get it right back. So couldn't we just have a little bit of the deference that normally inures only to presidents and give it to me? Because once I was a president and I'm about to be one again, it's only a matter of hours. I'm sure he would argue such a thing. I mean, you can't entertain it, but I'm sure he would argue such a thing. Anyway, I should continue with Goldsmith here. If Garland concludes that Trump has committed convictable crimes, he would then face a third and hardest decision, whether the national interest would be served by prosecuting Mr. Trump. This is not a question that lawyerly analysis alone can resolve. It's a judgment about the nature and fate of our democracy. A failure to indict Trump in these circumstances would imply that a president who cannot be indicted while in office is literally above the law, in defiance of the very notion of constitutional government. Yeah, that's kind of the big problem. It would encourage lawlessness by future presidents, none more so than Mr. Trump should he win the next election. By contrast, the rule of law would be vindicated by a Trump conviction, and it might be enhanced by a full judicial airing of Trump's possible crimes in office, even if it ultimately fails. So it's not necessarily the case here. He's hedging his bets. That Goldsmith is saying it's not necessarily the case that he is opposed to the prosecution. Even if the prosecution eventually fails, it might well have been worth it, although, who knows. And yet, Mr. Garland cannot be sanguine that a Trump prosecution would promote national reconciliation, and I don't think he is, and why would anybody be? What's the difference? Prosecutions aren't about national reconciliation, they're about prosecutions. But okay, you can't be sanguine that would promote any national reconciliation or enhance confidence in American justice. Indicting a past and possible future political adversary, or adversary, as we like to say in the United States, of the current president would be a cataclysmic event from which the nation would not soon recover. But of course, I remind you, it follows a similarly cataclysmic event from which the nation will not soon recover, January 6th. Like I say, if you breach the norm of the comings and goings being peaceful, not only will it be burdensome, difficult, and disruptive for you to pull that trick, it will also be burdensome, difficult, and disruptive for us to prosecute you for pulling that trick. I'm not worried about that. Equal and opposite reaction. Unfortunately, the real worrisome part is that so far all the pain falls on the public, right? You might as well try a coup. If it succeeds, the pain falls on the public and the benefit falls to you. If it fails, the pain falls on the public and nothing really happens to you because we don't prosecute you. So that's pretty damn dangerous, and I think he's trying to actually make that point that maybe prosecution is warranted just for dealing with that. Let's see. Indicting a past and possible future president. Cataclysmic. Nation wouldn't soon recover. But like I say, you breach the basic agreement of coming and going peacefully. There's really nothing we can do to help you here. All of your powers, all of the protections and deference that were afforded to you as a president, as a former president, as a political candidate, I think are sacrificed at that point. The prosecution would take many years to conclude and would last through and deeply impact the next election and would leave Trump's ultimate fate to the next administration, which could be headed by Trump, which would also be kind of problematic too. Like, I don't know if they should swear him into office if he's currently being prosecuted for constitutional crimes and efforts to defraud the United States. Even if he's elected under those circumstances, I don't know if you can swear him in. I mean, in good conscience. Anyway, I don't know if there's anything I have to give that some thought, whether you could make a constitutional argument that the oath can't be administered. Along the way, the prosecution would further inflame our already blazing partisan acrimony, consume the rest of Biden's term, don't worry about that, embolden and possibly politically enhance Mr. Trump, and threatened to set off, oh boy, tit-for-tat recriminations across presidential administrations. Oh no, not that. The prosecution might thus jeopardize Garland's cherished aim to restore norms of Justice Department independence integrity, even if he prosecutes Trump in the service of those norms. Well, what can you do? Prosecute in service of the norms, and it turns out that it doesn't help. Well, whoops, what can you do? I mean, not prosecuting doesn't help the norm. I can promise you that. I mean, 100% guarantee that just deciding that presidents who can't be prosecuted while in office and also can't be prosecuted after they leave office is going to be worse for political norms. It's impossible not to. It's a 100% guarantee. Everything up to and approaching 100% possibility of having the same problem by prosecuting him is therefore just mathematically worth trying. And if the prosecution fails, he continues, many will conclude that the country and the rule of law suffered tremendous pain for naught. But again, if the prosecution isn't tried, what else is there to conclude but that the country and the rule of law suffered tremendous pain for naught? Mr. Garland's decisions will be deeply controversial and have consequences beyond his lifetime. It is easy to understand, contrary to his many critics, why he is gathering as much information as possible, including what has emerged from the January 6th committee and the prosecution of the higher-ups involved in the Capitol breach before making these momentous judgments. So, maybe not as bad as I thought, or as bad as other people were leading me to believe it would be in reading Goldsmith. And I guess that's what makes Jack Goldsmith always worth reading in these instances. It's sometimes difficult to do, and sometimes he says things which you say, well, I don't, and that's crazy. And what about, well, he's just, as always, he's acknowledging that position. But I think he does plenty in here to hedge against adopting those positions. And, the opening is there. He does offer up the possibility that, look, it just might flat be worse for everything that you're looking to preserve. Even if you're never able to preserve any of it, it might just be worse for the rule of law not to prosecute. And I think that, it led us pretty easily to that conclusion. I do think that you could probably express it in mathematical terms. There's literally zero possibility, right? If you don't prosecute, well, I guess I should say, if you don't prosecute, then there's 100% guarantee that legal and constitutional remedies and the idea of them that keep a president in check just evaporate. There's just no reason to believe that they exist legally, judicially, right? But there you put yourself in Benjamin Franklin territory. That is to say, the alternative to including an impeachment clause in the Constitution as expressed allegedly, apocryphally. I don't know whether, how well they've established this. But it was attributed to Benjamin Franklin, which I'm paraphrasing. But again, essentially he was saying, I'm looking for my word here, was saying, he was questioned about it, or I don't know how the point came up. Well, why do we include impeachment in the Constitution, or should we, or isn't it inherently known to be, an inherent power of the Congress? Why should we enumerate it? Or should we have it at all? Should there be the possibility of a removal procedure? And his basic logic here was, if you don't have a legal, peaceful method of removing a tyrant or dictator or criminal or what have you from office, then that leaves only two possibilities. I guess we'll say two. He says one, but two possibilities, one of which is to agree to live under that tyranny. But that wasn't the consideration in the context of the revolution and the founding, I guess. But that the other more real world solution to that was, well, if there's no legal mechanism for removing him, you'll just have to resort to extra legal mechanisms for removing him. What we might, they couldn't have predicted this then, But they knew what they were talking about. I mean, this is what Franklin was speaking of, what I would call in the modern context the Ceausescu solution, which is to say Trump dies for his crimes, legally or otherwise. I mean, we prefer to handle things legally and to say there was everything, all due process was granted, charges were leveled, the man was arrested, tried, convicted by a jury of his peers and sentenced, and whether you have to sentence him, to capital punishment or not, up in the air. I don't care, honestly. A conviction is fine. I don't really, why even bother discussing whether or not he would be executed for these things? That's just never coming to pass, so forget it. But it should, but it isn't. But essentially, if there's no mechanism, if we've come to this conclusion after all these years and all the privileges and protections and immunities we've built into the presidency, we've come to the conclusion that a president can't be prosecuted while in office. You can't prosecute a sitting president, period. That's just now is said to be the case, even though it was speculative and a guess and a supposition when it was posited. We say we've now come to accept that, although we also say that Roe v. Wade was accepted, settled law too, and that didn't turn out to be true. So do keep that in mind. And maybe that's particularly relevant right now. I haven't even been keeping an eye on the fact on things on Twitter, and it's after 10 o'clock. I guess the fact that Twitter isn't currently exploding might tell me something, but maybe I've just caught it in a down cycle. But at any rate, if you can't prosecute while he's in office, but then you end up concluding that you can't prosecute after they're in office either, because then they're a political rival. I mean, I guess you could say, well, you can prosecute after the second term or second consecutive term. I don't remember what the Constitution says about a third term if it's non-consecutive, but maybe it rules that out too. But basically, but even so, I mean, I guess you wouldn't be a candidate for the presidency, but I guess you could still be a political candidate. And you could say, I'm running for Congress. And so, the Justice Department is somewhat constrained in what it can do. Although I guess they seem less constrained about prosecuting somebody who's running for Congress than running for president for whatever reason. But, if you can always hold out the specter of, I'm up. I mean, really, at that point, like if you're on trial as a mob boss, right? They arrest, the head of a crime family, and they're trying him for RICO conspiracy or whatever. Declare yourself a candidate for president at that point and say, DOJ has to back off. And I'm sure, though, they'd go to court and argue this isn't a legitimate thing. He's not really a candidate for president. He's just saying that to try and invoke privileges and immunities that we sometimes afford people who we consider to be, quote unquote, legitimate candidates for president. But I don't know, maybe it doesn't apply for everybody. But like I've always said, the guy paints his face orange. He's a lunatic. He believes in weird flat earth theories about almost everything. He's totally incompetent to the job. He killed 1 million people, mishandling the COVID epidemic. He's a criminal on multiple fronts. He's violating the emoluments clauses left and right from day one of his presidency. He's an insurrectionist and traitor, all these. But still, he's a candidate for president. So why is it any weirder that a defendant in a RICO mob trial would say, I'm a candidate for president. You can't do this to me. You'll affect the outcome of the election. Well, he hasn't filed any petitions, and it doesn't look like he'll have any ballot access. And okay, well, all these things are, they're all true, and he hasn't made any progress toward this. And we might assume that even though Donald Trump hasn't made any progress towards qualifying for the ballot in 2024 either, that's just because he's only, he's waiting to do it. But yeah, a reasonable person could certainly conclude, well, he has a better shot than the mob boss at getting on the ballot anyway. I don't know. But yeah, basically it's pretty problematic. And apparently nothing can trigger the dismissal of the idea that, look, at some point the guy, is not president anymore, and you don't have to defer to him anymore. And the fact that he wants to run again isn't really enough. And if armed insurrection isn't enough to establish that breaking point, then, we're back where we started. There's just no breaking point. And once you're elected president, or once you're a major party nominee, or once you have a pretty good shot at being a nominee and have raised, I don't know, they come up with a number of millions of dollars, a number of signatures on ballot access petitions, what would it be that triggers that? Well, too much of an intellectual exercise. And the court would say, we don't need to determine that hypothetical, but we either believe or don't believe this person's a candidate, and that's all there is.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Hours Radio. It sounds like I had a couple shots of whiskey or something during the break, which is not a bad idea at this point. All right, well, let's see. For those of us on court watch, and that's not really me, but I was just taking a look to see if I could figure out what was going on. Chris Geidner is on court watch, and if you want to crack the code of what's going on, we'll read his thread, which he's been adding to for an hour or so, noting, first of all, at 9:30 or thereabouts, that SCOTUS, I guess the first action out of the court, SCOTUS granting 2 new cases, a False Claims Act case and a Bank Secrecy Act case, but that offering no clues about what's to come for the day in terms of decisions. Then he says, here's a full list of orders from the SCOTUS, and there's a link, but that's not what we're after here. No word today from the justices on Moore v. Harper, that being the independent state legislature theory case. That was the other biggie that we were worried about, that Adam Liptak wrote about here, and there's a link to the New York Times piece about the Supreme Court may hear the 800-pound gorilla of election law cases. Next up, Chris says the court denied cert in a death penalty case brought by Ohio. A new trial had been ordered by the Sixth Circuit. And Thomas, joined by Alito, wanted to summarily reverse the Sixth Circuit, a move that would have put August Cassano back on death row. He continues on this about half an hour ago. SCOTUS opinions coming in less than 10 minutes, and a note to subscribe to his newsletter before they start. And you might want to do that. I'm sure it's a quality production in all respects. First SCOTUS decision, though, to come out this morning is Marietta Memorial Hospital Employee Health Benefit Plan versus DaVita. Kavanaugh has the 7-2 opinion for the court reversing the Sixth Circuit. Kagan dissents along with Sotomayor, in case you were wondering about the breakdown of this thing. So it sounds like bad news there, but not the catastrophic news we were all waiting for. There will be at least one more opinion, he says just 24 minutes ago. Because the decisions are released in reverse seniority, this means that there will be no Barrett opinions today. So that's of some interest. in case you're trying to decode what will be released and what won't. Further, SCOTUS opinions could come from any other justices, including Kavanaugh, though. So if you were worried, for instance, that the majority opinion in a case finally overruling Roe v. Wade was going to be written by Barrett and be released today, this is like one of those logic puzzles. The answer is no, that won't be happening. Could they still overturn Roe v. Wade under someone else's authorship? Sure, I guess so. I'm not certain what that tells us, but it does tell us interesting facts about the way these opinions come out and might help you glean, if not today, at some future point, what might happen during the day while you were sitting on the edge of your seat waiting for opinions. So, one more is coming. We don't know which one yet. Second SCOTUS decision. Here's one just 14 minutes ago. In the decision in U.S. v. Taylor. Taylor, whoever that is, wins, with SCOTUS finding a narrow definition of violent crime. Gorsuch has the opinion for the, again, 7-2 court. This time Thomas and Alito dissenting. So maybe it's good news. And I don't know the case. I'm not familiar with it. Just wanted to keep an eye out for the big ones we're waiting for. 13 minutes ago, Chris adds to this, there will be at least one more decision today. Any further decisions today, though, will not come from Barrett or Kavanaugh. Third and not last, the SCOTUS decision. So, okay, there'll be at least two more, then it turns out. U.S. v. Washington. Breyer has the unanimous opinion for the court, reversing the Ninth Circuit, siding with the U.S. government, and holding that a Washington workers' comp law discriminates against the feds somehow. All right, we can all parse that in our spare time. Any further decisions today will come from, then, Breyer, Thomas, or Chief Justice Roberts. So, yes, that is taken to mean that there will be no more Alito opinions expected today. I guess they could always break precedent and just chuck it out at the end. But I guess this decoding is meant to say that if you thought that the abortion decision was coming today and that the abortion decision's majority opinion would be written by Alito, then, according to the traditions in place for the release of Supreme Court opinions, the answer would appear to be no. That doesn't mean that it might not come anyway. That doesn't mean that the abortion decision might not come out with the majority opinion written by Thomas or Chief Justice Roberts, for that matter. Oh my goodness, Joan McCarter unexpectedly calling in to, I guess we'll get an update. Hey, good morning, Joan. How you doing?
Good morning.
Hi, it surprised me. I'm scared.
You're Supreme Court watching too.
Yes, well, I was trying to keep an eye on it just to see what was going on, and so far nothing are the ones that we were all afraid of today. But decoding Chris Geidner's tea leaf reading, so I guess that's it for at least Chris's estimation of whether or not there will be an Alito-crafted opinion released today. And if you think that the abortion one was going to be written by Alito, then you still have to keep waiting. Right. But I guess there's still possibility.
Right.
Well,
there's still the possibility that Roberts got 4 of them.
Yeah, or took. I'm sure that's the sort of thing that I could certainly see post-decision analysis being, look, the chief said this is just too momentous. I'm taking it, and whatever they decide to do, he's putting his name to it. I don't know why he would do that, but
I don't think he would. I don't know. I mean, the only way I would see Roberts doing it is if he prevailed.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And 15-week ban is upheld, but it doesn't completely toss Roe. So I don't know. I could be wrong.
Could be
wrong.
And if you are, you'll be here when it happens.
Right.
So, okay. Well, you must be nervous.
At any rate, we only have Breyer, Roberts, or Thomas yet to decide. And I don't know which one was assigned to the New York gun case. So that's still a possibility.
All right. Just watching and waiting. I thought that was kind of just interesting parsing of the supposed rules of the release of those opinions. I don't think I knew any of those protocols, so it seems
Reverse
fun.
seniority?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a new one to me. So it's very interesting. Like I said, those logic puzzles. If you were ever able to figure out who sits next to who because of the color of their shirt or the meal choice or whatever,
Right.
then you can
Roberts
figure this out.
Roberts does not have seniority. It's just by virtue of him being Chief Justice.
Yeah, he gets extra.
He gets to put his out whenever he feels like it.
All right. So, all right, yeah, that makes some sense. I mean, I know he doesn't have the years of seniority, but I guess Chief Justice just gets special treatment overall. So, fair enough, especially as we had spent the bulk of the morning considering the various special authorities and protections and deferences that a at least sitting president of the United States gets. We were just considering Jack Goldsmith's writing about what Merrick Garland faces in deciding what to do, if anything, about prosecutions.
Yeah.
Seems kind of weird, but in Jack Goldsmith form, there's just enough hedging there for you to come away with, well, okay, I better keep checking in with him because he's not just being totally partisan and saying, gosh, we can't prosecute a former president who just happens to be Republican like I am. I always worry about that with Jack Goldsmith, but he always avoids it by that much. He's a very good lawyer and a very good writer.
Both. But, yeah, a Republican.
Yeah, we should never let that get out of our sight. But he properly leaves the door open for, okay, but this case is just unlike any other because insurrection. Because
violent attack on the Capitol.
Right.
Death threats against... Yeah.
Right. You can't ignore that. And as I'm trying to find some legal avenue out of that. And maybe he's leaning the same sort of way, but just saying, my basic political science theory of it was, for all the deferences that we give to the president of the United States and all the ways we hold him above the law while he's president, and now I guess even after he's president, or even in the period during which he's considered a serious candidate for the presidency, even if he's never won it. Maybe even you give him weird deferences. You gotta.
I would put in a side note about SCOTUS today that it wasn't entirely. I mean, the one that just came down from Maine is bad.
Okay.
Maine has to provide funding to families who want to send their kids to religious schools.
That's not so great. So that's the latest. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
One extra.
There's a program in Maine for sending kids to private schools if a public secondary school wasn't available to them. So they had this fund to help parents send kids to private schools, but they excluded religious schools. And now 6 of the justices say, never mind establishment of religion and all of that. We're going to go ahead and say you have to pay for it.
All right. Well, there it is. That's the fourth from today, and all the commentators saying not the last.
This has a good name, Shoup v. Twyford.
That sounds English, like an old English case, or maybe that's actually the name of the town, Shoup v. Twyford on Tyne.
It's the chief. It's 5-4. Whether a court must determine whether evidence would help an inmate seeking a writ of habeas corpus, and whether the court can consider that evidence before the court grants an order allowing the inmate to develop new evidence.
Okay. So, this seems to be trending away from the big stuff that I don't know what the tea leaves say about whether or not there's room for
and we have the R numbers, which means that there are not more cases coming today.
Okay.
Almost certainly.
All right. So they've left you on the cliffhanger once again.
They make all of this just so obscure.
Yeah, but, they should just. You'd think that they would be a little looser with things and just be like, as events warrant, we tell you what the law is. We don't have to have Vatican smoke signals about it.
Yeah, but they like their Vatican smoke signals.
Yeah, Shoup v. Twyford.
Shoup v. Twyford. I know. I love
Two competing brands of orange marmalade have sued each other, apparently. Goodness. Okay. Well, not the first time or the last time, but okay. Well, at any rate, now we get so the decks are clear. When's the next decision announcement day that they've?
Thursday.
All right. So you're back on the clock. And how many more are there after that? Is Thursday the last day that they do this, or could they make us do this next week?
Yeah, let's see. I think there were 18 cases going in today, so they did 5, so 13 more. I don't see them releasing all 13 in one day, so there will be more decision days.
They're
I'm
set to ruin next Tuesday as well.
It'll be Monday.
Oh, okay.
It was Tuesday this week because yesterday was the federal holiday.
Yes, okay. All right, that makes sense. And they like to do things on Mondays. Okay, so I don't know. I've never stood around waiting for these decisions, and I think I was probably discouraged from doing so for the last time. What case was it that they all ran outside and read the opinion and read it backwards and wrong?
Affordable Care Act.
Was that it? Okay.
Yes.
I don't know anymore. I can hardly remember. I have so many mass shootings to keep track of. I can't keep track of all the instances of the Supreme Court cases being read wrong. But I did see that again this morning, that somebody else doing the open carry thing somewhere and setting off a panic.
The Oklahoma, I think. Yeah.
Right. And the guy just saying, I'm just walking around. What?
Oh, what they ended up, I think this is the case, arresting him because he had brass knuckles.
Well, you're not supposed to. That's what it says. Yeah, okay.
The gun is fine, but you have brass knuckles, so we have to detain you.
Right. It's, look, compliance with the law. That's an important, I mean, it's dumb, obviously. Like, the AR-15 is clearly the more dangerous than the brass knuckles. And we'd rather have you, honestly, if we have to have a trade-off, do the brass knuckles. But then again, an arcane set of arbitrary and stupid rules are in place, and if you don't follow every single one of those things, there's a danger to the public. Now, that's a direct analog to the gun safety, like that loaded magazine probably shouldn't be in there. There shouldn't be a bullet in the chamber. You should never put your finger on the trigger until you're ready to fire. And all these, that's just a bunch of stupid rules. Well, they keep people safe. If you can't follow the one that says don't have brass knuckles, and quite honestly, at some point, what did you need the brass knuckles for? You could shoot, stab, mutilate anybody that came near you. The brass knuckles. I better take these. It's not safe out there. I don't know. Right. So now, okay. I also walk around with scaffolding with a pulley and an anvil on it. And a portable X that I can put down and drop the anvil on people, because you never know how you're going to need to defend yourself. I have piano wire in my pockets. Whatever. Okay, so fine, they get him on the brass knuckles. And I know he'll think that's stupid, but you could say, well, remember that part about how it was all okay because you were a law-abiding gun owner? No, you're not.
No, you're not. You have brass knuckles.
Yeah. I mean, I know that you didn't think that was the law we were worried about, but we put these things out there, and you keep stepping on the rakes. So, I don't know. Anyway, they need to make a federal crime out of that so they can take his guns. That would have been funny. You have brass knuckles? We're taking your guns. That's a great detail, Joan. Thanks for bringing that up.
Law for you.
Cool. Okay. Well, what else besides waiting for the Supreme Court to destroy the rights of half the country is going on?
Well, we're waiting for Democrats to completely roll over and let Republicans stomp all over them on the not about guns gun bill.
Well, yeah, okay. We see the path for that already. John Cornyn got booed at the convention, so now he's going to be angry.
Now he's going to be nothing that does anything of purpose that's worthwhile. Is likely to pass at this point. I mean, if you're saying, a conviction of domestic violence against a person you're not married to is not enough to keep you from getting a gun, well then, pro-life Republicans are certainly not going to keep guns out of the hands of violent abusers.
No, and they're disincentivizing marriage, which is terrible. I thought they hated that. Now, what's the incentive to get married? I'll get arrested if I threaten this woman with a gun. Now, we better stay unmarried.
And apparently, and I need to chase this down to verify it, but they are talking about making the grants available to incentivize states to impose red flag laws to any state, regardless of whether they impose a red flag law. I'm not positive on that, but it's looking right now as if the grants could go for anything.
Okay. And they could give them to religious schools as well. Why not?
Sure.
It goes through that. The grant administrator in your state will be religious schools. Well, okay. That seems wrong and upside down. I see that I think they're already looking for paths out of the framework, and I'm sure all the 10 Republicans are looking for the exits.
Oh, the framework that they all decided on, 10 Republicans signed on to a week ago, a week ago Sunday, that was out the door immediately.
Okay.
They all said,
so
we support in principle taking guns away from the boyfriend loophole, ending the boyfriend loophole. I don't like saying boyfriend loophole because it's not just boyfriends, but yes, I mean, stalkers. Anyway.
Yeah.
They all agreed in principle to ending the boyfriend loophole and then immediately turned around and said, oh, no, we have a problem with that one. I
will lose my guns. That's bad. I'm guilty of this.
So, no, there was no framework agreed to. If they turned around and said, oops, nope, take back that one, then really.
Yeah, I guess there's a way out of everything. And what occurs to me now is I'm thinking, I think the fact that Cornyn was booed. I don't know if they were harassing Dan Crenshaw, of course, also at the convention. But was that about guns or was it about something else?
That was about Ukraine.
Okay. Difficult to keep track. I was distracted with the eye patch. That was just
because Tucker Carlson says he shouldn't be supporting Biden on Ukraine.
Okay. So
and
now
that's why he was calling him Eye Patch McCain. And so this is,
And Cornyn, I think, was being booed about being part of the gun framework thing. But now he'll obviously go home and say, maybe I need to reconsider. I need to look for a way out of this thing. I'm sure he's already found it. There are multiple exits, I'm sure. But
well, knowing John Cornyn and having seen John Cornyn in action for all of these years, no, Cornyn was not going to let this happen from the get-go. I mean, nothing of substance could pass.
And so I'm curious about
McConnell sending Cornyn in. It's what our friends at America's Voice, Frank Sherry, calls the Cornyn con.
Oh, because he does it often enough.
He does it often enough, and he's done it primarily on immigration.
Okay.
Say, okay, we're going to work out a compromise with the Democrats. And then slowly start backing away, saying this and this and this and this the Democrats can't agree to. And then finally, Democrats are being so partisan, they're blowing this whole thing up. We just can't make it work. And, this has been the path they've been taking, and part of it is because Democrats have been so anxious to get an agreement that they're letting Cornyn be the public voice of this. They're letting Cornyn essentially set the narrative. And, of course, the traditional media saying, well, John Cornyn standing there with his white hair and looking so serious, and former Supreme Court Justice for the state of Texas, sure, you're credible.
I guess. I mean, I don't know
why. And it's going to all be the Democrats' fault. And once again, there's just absolutely no way to pass meaningful gun legislation.
Yeah. I was wondering whether now that's a normal play for, as you point out, for Cornyn, and I mean it's reminiscent of their usual play for everything. I mean, they did healthcare this way, right?
Yeah.
We have to keep negotiating with them, and it was always you just delay them as long as you can, and then eventually, when it's no longer plausible, you just say, "Well, I'm a no then."
Yeah,
and you do that. Cornyn does this all the time. I was wondering earlier whether earlier on in the process, what particular play, which exit they would look for. And I was wondering whether they were going to go with like at some point Biden would say, this is a great framework. I'm glad we've come together. And boy, you just have to be blind to the situation to walk away from this opportunity and not take it. And then you would have somebody say, have to be blind. That's very insulting. I'm so insulted by the president's language, right, that you wouldn't do it. And I was wondering whether he was going to, because they often use that. The president or somebody else said something that was too insulting and he refuses to apologize, so I won't vote. Yes,
well, that's Joe Manchin.
Manchin likes to do that, certainly.
Yeah.
I wondered whether the Republicans were going to, it would be particularly ridiculous for them to do that now that Cornyn has been insulted by Republicans at his own convention, and then say, what I'm really upset about is what a Democrat said elsewhere.
Which is why, of course, Democrats aren't saying anything,
Right.
in part, probably.
Don't say anything. You might upset
God,
them.
it's frustrating.
Yeah.
It's breaking my heart for Chris Murphy, who I think genuinely, being the senator
Trying
from
to do the right
Connecticut,
thing.
having promised back after Newtown that he would do something, that he would fix this. I think that he is so invested in it
Yeah. That is sad.
that he's being completely used.
He's probably has said, look, I mean, it's so important, especially in Connecticut, but it's so important to everybody that I'm willing to put myself out there to be trampled and humiliated if there's a chance that it will result in a real legislative package that will make any kind of difference, however small. And so Republicans said, you're willing to be humiliated and trampled?
Right.
I can help you with that.
We'll take that opportunity.
Awesome. I was wondering who I was going to trample.
There's one other thing hanging out there that hasn't gotten a lot of attention, and I can't imagine Republicans are actually going to agree to, and that's the expanded background checks on underage assault weapons buyers.
Okay.
Because, there's been this loophole that 18-year-olds can buy rifles because they have to go out hunting with their fathers.
Yeah.
So, of course, if they can buy rifles, they can buy assault rifles. But now what's been in the framework, as far as I know, and I haven't seen it dropped, is expanded background checks on that.
Okay.
And I have a hard time imagining Republicans are going to let that one go.
Yeah,
or continue to stay in the law.
At some point. Eventually.
So I've been thinking that they've probably been holding that in their back pocket as the last minute thing to object to when they get the other stuff supposedly resolved. I don't know.
I could certainly see that, and you have the Rand Paul types just saying, I understand the concern, but look, if you're 18 and can vote and you have rights in this country, why have less? You can't have less rights just for a couple of years. And if you vote, okay, well, wow. Nobody's going to change the voting age to accommodate that either, and it may or may not make any sense, but you only need a couple Republicans to say it doesn't, for whatever reason, to block it. And I don't know. There's probably no point in trying to guess what stupid out they'll create when none of them have to be anchored in logic.
Right.
But that's the game we play. I don't know. To try to predict it, to see how well we know these people, and they continually surprise us. And the real lesson is that you can't predict these people because logic doesn't matter. And, you're stuck trying to think of, well, what would make the most sense for them to look senseless? I don't know. Nothing. Why bother? I guess you could wait and see, but then what do we do? There's nothing to do while you're waiting for them to come up with their excuse. Oh, well. Well, I don't know. There's no Supreme Court decisions coming. And I think we're all eyes back on the next set of hearings.
Yes.
I was amused by Trump saying that Eastman is now a coffee boy.
Eastman's coffee boy.
And I guess we just wait. But I'm very pleased to have heard from you. I'm glad that the terrible decision day isn't here, and we, now
gives me more time to figure out what I'm going to write when it does come down.
Yeah, I guess so. And
both of them, guns and abortion.
Right. Yes, and now Chris Geidner in his thread did mention the independent legislature's case at some point, and I kind of glossed over it and now forget what was happening.
They didn't grant it today, so it wasn't in today's orders.
But it could be later.
With everything happening with January 6th, Thomas is definitely going to want to take it because Thomas is Thomas, but I don't know that the rest of them will. Because right now, I mean, it would be really, really, really bad to take that one right now.
Yeah, and I mean, the political question doctrine is custom made for them to duck these things. And I got to imagine that at some point the chief is saying, all right, look, we've taken all these other terrible... We're going to take so much heat for the abortion one and the guns one. Couldn't we just not have heat on this? Because, we're not going to go anywhere with this. And it's just going to raise calls for your resignation, Clarence.
Yeah. You can't do this, Thomas. You just can't do this right now.
Yeah.
When your wife is going to be called to testify for the January 6th committee.
It's just too much trouble for us. Do you think they call one another by first names, or are they last names like kids at camp? I don't know. Hey, Thomas, what's up? I don't know. Probably not. Okay.
Probably not.
Well, I'm glad you were able to come by. Thank you for thinking to do it, just to chime in. Everybody's happy to hear from you, and glad that the pressure's off for today.
For today.
Yeah, good. Okay, so now we get to watch for the next couple of hearings, and then Thursday we're back on Court Watch. So are you.
Exactly.
We'll be on the edge of our seat with you and thinking about you then. Thanks for coming by today.
Thanks,
Okay.
Kagro.
Take care. And now time for us to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Coming up next right here on Netroots Radio. I'm saying these things so that I give myself time to switch over to Skype where I can find his description of what's going on. And then I run out of time to give you that description by telling you what I'm doing. But what else was I going to do? It's dead air otherwise.
Netrootsradio.com.
That's the insider word.
You've been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Here we go. The take on the morning. Trump was told that the election workers that he terrorized turned out to be innocent, but he didn't care. Then, of course, stuff from all over the country and all over the world on the rest of the menu. From New York, from Missouri, Eric Greitens back in the news, and Cyprus internationally. Stay tuned.